The tent had been cut open from the inside. Not torn by wind, not clawed open by an animal, but sliced in long, deliberate strokes from a person standing inside it who wanted out faster than the door would allow. 9 experienced hikers had been sleeping in that tent on a mountainside in the Ural Mountains in February of 1959. Within minutes, all 9 were outside in temperatures near 30 below zero, and at least some of them were barefoot. They ran downhill, away from their own shelter, away from their own supplies, into a night that would kill every one of them. Soviet investigators spent months trying to explain what could make 9 capable people do that. In the end, the official case file closed with 3 words: unknown compelling force. That phrase has outlived the Soviet Union itself, and no one has ever replaced it with something better. Igor Dyatlov is 23 years old and already the kind of leader other students want to follow. He's an engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, methodical, careful with maps, the sort of person who checks a compass twice before he trusts it. In late January of 1959, he leads 9 friends on a skiing expedition into the northern Urals, a grueling multi-day trek meant to earn the group a top hiking certification. Zinaida Kolmogorova skis beside him, one of the strongest athletes in the group. Ludmila Dubinina, the youngest woman on the trip, keeps a diary of the journey, recording small jokes and cold fingers, and the beauty of empty white ridgelines. Yuri Doroshenko, Rustam Slobodin, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, all engineering and technical students who've hiked together before and trust each other completely in difficult terrain. Semyon Zolotaryov, older than the rest at 37, joins as an experienced ski instructor. None of them are reckless. Every one of them has survived worse weather than this before. Hiking at this level isn't a hobby in the Soviet Union of 1959. It's a graded sport with certifications and category rankings, and a trip like this one, deep into the northern Urals in the dead of winter, is meant to earn the group the highest category available to amateur hikers. Dyatlov has planned the route for weeks, cross-checking terrain against older survey maps, building in a schedule with real margin for bad weather. The group photographs everything along the way: snowy ridgelines, frozen rivers, each other laughing in oversized coats, rolls of film that will later be developed by investigators searching for any clue at all. Nothing in a single frame shows fear. Nothing shows tension between any of them, right up until the last photograph anyone can date with certainty. This looks like 9 friends having exactly the trip they planned. On the 1st of February, the group sets up camp on the slope of a mountain the local Monsey people call Kolotsyakal, which translates in their language to Mountain of the Dead. Dyatlov's team doesn't know that translation yet. They pitch their tent on an open slope rather than descending into the shelter of the tree line, a choice Dyatlov makes deliberately to save time on the next day's climb. It's a decision experienced hikers make often. It has never gotten anyone killed before. Something happens inside that tent between 10 at night and 2 in the morning. No one hears it. No one survives to describe it. The group is supposed to send a telegram once they return to civilization, confirming they've made it back safely. When that telegram never arrives, days pass before anyone official takes the silence seriously. Relatives push for a search. It takes until the 20th of February, nearly 3 weeks after the group made camp, for search parties and military aircraft to even begin combing the region in earnest. What investigators find when a search party finally reaches the site is a tent collapsed under snow, sliced open from within in several places, with warm clothing, food, and supplies still folded neatly inside. Footprints lead away from the tent. 8 sets, sometimes 9, preserved in snow that hadn't yet been disturbed by wind. Some of the prints are bare feet. Some are in socks. One person wears a single boot. At 30 below, exposed skin can develop frostbite within minutes. Yet these footprints show no sign of stumbling, no wandering, no confusion. They walk, then run more than a kilometer downhill toward a distant tree line, in a straight and steady line that never once turns back toward the tent, the supplies, or the only shelter for miles. Under a large cedar tree at the forest's edge, searchers find the remains of a small fire and the bodies of Doroshenko and Krivonischenko, stripped down to their underwear despite the cold, their hands and forearms burned in places, as if they'd fed the fire with their bare hands after their fingers had already gone numb. Branches on the cedar are broken up to 5 meters high, as if someone climbed it to see something in the distance or to escape something on the ground. Between the cedar and the tent, searchers find the bodies of Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, each apparently frozen in the act of trying to crawl back toward the shelter they'd fled. For more bodies aren't found until May, when the snow finally melts enough to expose a ravine buried under 4 meters of drift. For nearly 2 months, 4 families are told only that a search continues, with no timeline and no real information, while search dogs and volunteers walk the same slope over and over without result. Dubinina, Zolotaryov, Kolevatov, and Thibaut Brignol are found here, better dressed than the others, some wearing clothing cut from the bodies who died first. And their injuries are unlike anything the first 5 suffered. Think about that for a moment. Kolevatov and the rest died from hypothermia and exposure, the same as the others by the cedar. But Thibaut Brignol's skull is fractured, and Dubinina and Zolotaryov both have severe chest fractures, the kind of blunt force trauma a Soviet pathologist compares, in his own report, to the impact of a car crash. None of them show any external wounds to match it. No bruising on the skin above the broken bone. Dubinina's tongue, eyes, part of her lips, and a piece of her scalp are missing entirely, and this detail is not photographed as clearly as the others in the official file. Investigators comb through everything they can find. The tent shows no sign of a struggle inside it, no blood, no evidence of an attack by another person. The cuts are precise, made by a knife from the inside. Exactly the kind of cut you make when you need out immediately and the door won't do. Radiometric testing on clothing recovered from the final 4 bodies shows levels well above natural background radiation, a detail measured carefully at the time and then mentioned only in passing in the final report. Some clothing recovered from the final 4 bodies tests with elevated levels of radiation, results that appear briefly in the file before being downplayed in the official conclusion. Reporters and Mansi tribes people in the area are questioned and cleared almost immediately. No one can find a footprint belonging to anyone but the 9 hikers themselves. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, closes the case in May of 1959. His final report states that the hikers died from a compelling natural force they were unable to overcome. He does not specify what that force is. He does not offer an alternative. Family members are permitted a brief, closed viewing of the case materials and told not to discuss the details publicly. Several of the more troubling photographs never make it into the version of the file later released to the public. The file is sealed for decades. Years later, Ivanov will tell a journalist off the record that he saw things in the course of this investigation he was never permitted to write down, and that pressure came from officials well above his own rank to close the case quickly and without further questions. But that wasn't even the strangest part, because decades after the case was closed, searchers and journalists going back through the file find something that had barely been mentioned in 1959. Several witnesses in the region reported unusual bright orbs of light moving across the sky on the night the hikers died, and at least 2 of these reports came from separate, unconnected military patrols nowhere near each other. Neither patrol knew, at the time, that anything unusual had happened on that mountain at all. They only reported what they'd seen because someone, years later, finally thought to ask, "Remember what I told you about the fractures with no bruising?" Now think about how far 9 people would have to fall, or how hard something would have to strike them, to break bone without ever touching skin. For theories have circulated in the decades since, and none of them explain everything. No investigator, official or amateur, has ever managed to make all the evidence point in a single direction at once. The first is an avalanche, a slow, low-velocity slab that could crush ribs without leaving surface bruising, and might panic a group into cutting their way out fast. Soviet-era investigators dismissed this at the time, since the snow above the tent showed no evidence of a slide, and the tent itself remained mostly upright, still staked into the slope when it was found. A 2019 reinvestigation using modern modeling revived this theory, arguing that a small, slow slab could move just enough snow to injure without leaving the dramatic scarring of a full avalanche. But even its own authors admit it doesn't explain the missing tongue and eyes, or the radiation, or the lights reported in the sky. The second theory points to a rare weather phenomenon called a katabatic wind, a sudden, violent downslope gust capable of both damaging the tent and inducing the kind of infrasound that causes disorientation and panic in humans without them ever hearing a sound. Some researchers who support this theory point to the specific shape of the ridge above the camp, which they argue is unusually good at generating this effect. It would explain why the hikers fled without dressing, in a state of sudden, overwhelming panic. It does not explain the internal injuries at all, and it offers no account for the radiation found on their clothing. The third theory is military, some form of weapons testing, conducted in a restricted region already known for Soviet defense activity. An incident covered up so thoroughly that even the investigator closing the case was never allowed to name what killed his own witnesses on paper. This theory accounts for the radiation and the lights in the sky, and for the extraordinary secrecy surrounding a case that otherwise involved 9 dead civilian students. It offers no physical explanation for how a weapons test could crush a chest without breaking skin, and no test of this kind has ever been officially acknowledged by any government since. The fourth belief has never left the region entirely. Some people who live near Koletsyakal still won't say the mountain's name after dark. The Mansi word for it existed long before 9 hikers ever pitched a tent on its slope, tied to older stories of 9 hunters who reportedly died their generations earlier under circumstances no one can verify. No one investigating this case has ever explained why a mountain got that name in the first place, or why the coincidence of 9 deaths would repeat itself twice on the very same ground. No official reopening of this case has ever produced a cause that accounts for every detail at once. Not the cuts from inside the tent, not the barefoot footprints walking calmly downhill into fatal cold, not the internal injuries with no matching bruises, not the missing tongue, not the radiation, not the lights in the sky that same night, reported by people who never spoke to each other. Russian prosecutors reopened the case in 2019 at the request of the victims' relatives and concluded, once again, that an avalanche was the most likely cause. The relatives who pushed for that reopening have said publicly that they still don't consider the case closed. Igor Dyatlov never got to lead another expedition. Zinaida Kolmogorova never finished the diary entry she started that same evening. Ludmila Dubinina's family was told, for years, only that she died of exposure, and never given a clear answer for the rest. 9 people walked out of a warm tent into a killing cold, and every one of them believed, in that moment, that staying inside was somehow worse. The pass where they died now carries their leader's name. Tourists visit every year, some out of genuine respect, some chasing the mystery itself. And every one of them stands on the same slope where 9 people once made a choice that cost them everything, for a reason still nobody can name. The families who buried them in 1959 never got the compelling force explained in plain language. They got 3 words, a sealed file, and decades of silence from a government that had already decided the story was over. One more thing before we go. If you know a case like this, something that happened near you, something that was never explained, send it to us. It might become the next episode. If this story stayed with you, there's another one waiting. This has been Dark Trace.